Welcome back to Sahara TV. My name is Rodolfo Okonkwo. The proposed Nigerian budget of 2014 has been making news for all the wrong reasons. With accusations of missing billions from oil revenues and subsidy funds, the credibility of those who are managing Nigeria's economy has never been questioned the way it is questioned today. This week, the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Lamido Sanusi, was in a face-off with President Goodluck Jonathan. The president asked the governor to resign, and he refused. Today, newspapers in Nigeria are saying that the whereabouts of the central bank governor is unknown. To help us untangle the intricacies and the intrigues within the Nigerian economy today, we have invited a renowned economist and the managing director of Cocoa Shin Nigeria Limited, Ikeja, Mr. Henry Boyo. Mr. Henry, welcome to Sahara TV.
Thank you, Rudolph. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me start by asking you the basic. Who is running Nigeria's economy? Is it the World Bank? Is it the Minister of Finance? Or is it the President of Nigeria? Who is in control?
I would say all of the above.
So how do they manage to do this? Whose interest is superior?
Well, put it this way, I thought you would say, how do they manage to mismanage the economy? That's probably more like it, because we really are not getting the benefit of good governance. There can be little doubt about that. But you're also right. There appears to be the unseen hand of external forces dictating and to some extent giving us the wrong advice as to how to run the economy. Unfortunately, the local experts in government either do not have the courage to tell them, sorry, this is not helping us. It has never helped. There is no country we know of that has benefited in this manner. So can you allow us to do our own thing? Unfortunately, to my knowledge, we have in the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank embedded members of the IMF or officials of the IMF and who are quietly advising our government. Unfortunately, the impact or the result of the advices they have given have not been salutary to the Nigerian populace.
Now, let me give you an example. In an appearance before a Senate Committee on Finance, Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Minister of Finance, told the committee that she did not know anything about 200 billion naira kerosene subsidy that was not budgeted in 2013. She told the senators that they should ask the NNPC. Now, what does that say about how she's managing the economy?
Well, it's rather unfortunate. But having said so, some of us are not surprised at all, because in the first term, in her first time in office as finance minister, strictly finance minister on that occasion, as you know, now she's not only finance minister, she's also the controlling minister of the economy. But I'm not surprised, because at the first coming, you would expect that someone with those type of very high credentials would do much better in terms of the significant indices that should drive economic growth or drive the engine of growth in the economy. Unfortunately, this was not so. During her time, we had a, how would I say it, a strategy under which CBN continued to borrow money it did not need. We had incessant or consistent excess liquidity, meaning there was so much money in the system, money that could not be accessed for infrastructural development, or neither could such monies be also accessed for reducing our debt. She was also in control of the economy at a time that we had a bloated, or should I say, fortuitous windfall in foreign exchange as a result of the high prices of crude oil. And surprisingly, our exchange rate continued to fall against all expectations. Neither did employment increase during her time. So it was a bit of a shock for some of us when she came back. And but as I say, we're not surprised, because the promises she made when she came back a second time. For example, her promise about reducing recurrent expenditure in the economy to maybe reasonable proportions like 50% recurrent and 50% capital. If anything, we are totally alarmed that the 2014 budget and the medium-term expenditure framework, 2014-2016, has been predicated on a recurrent expenditure that is about over 72%, probably the highest recurrent expenditure in the last 10 years or so. So we are not surprised, but we are very disappointed that somebody with such credentials, who is supposed to be coordinating Minister of the Economy, does not know the value of kerosene subsidies or how much was paid in kerosene subsidies. She probably also has not shown much interest or any indication that she knows the exact volume or value of subsidies that we are incurring at the moment. She also doesn't seem to know much on why the interest rate appears, commercial lending rates in the country appears to be in the 20% region when it should be in 4, 5, 6%, like in serious-minded, focused, developed economies elsewhere. Her answer to a question on why interest rates were high were rather flimsy. It was like, oh, I don't really know, but we must discuss this with the bank. And that doesn't sound like an economic expert, surely. So you see, I'm not surprised, but definitely we are disappointed.
Now, let's talk about the central bank. In an interview with Channels TV, you said that the governor of the central bank should have gone to the police to report money that was not remitted to the government instead of writing a letter to the president. Are you comfortable with the way Sanusi ran the central bank of Nigeria?
I will be very careful to lay blame at the foot of Malam Lamido Sanusi because apart from his, how would I say it, swagger and his sometimes very abrupt statements and all that, the issues which relate to the work of the central bank governor in terms of strategy of attaining what is normally called price stability, which relates to a benign price for cost of funds, 6-7%, especially for the small, medium-scale industries, an inflation rate in the level of 1 to 2%, as is, you might be surprised to hear, as currently happens in Zimbabwe, where their rate of inflation is about 1.2%. But indeed, with all the paraphernalia of experienced personnel, both in the central bank and in the Ministry of Finance, we have never been able to achieve this kind of indices for a very simple reason. The central bank governor, Mr. Lamido Sanusi, took off from where Soludo took off, and Soludo took off from where the former Sanusi also took off. And precipitating the economic imbroglio that we seem to have in the country is the faulty economic framework that all three governors I have mentioned have adopted and sustained. They have sustained an economic management framework, a monetary management framework that ensures that as Nigerians, as a country, we will become poorer when we become richer. This has been very clear. So I'm saying that Sanusi may not be singled out as being the offender, as the case may be, because the former Sanusi, the first Sanusi before Soludo himself, and the current Sanusi have all deliberately created and maintained a system that has made us as a country poorer, especially when we got richer. And it's rather unfortunate. This observation has been on the table, has been in the media for over 12 years. It has not been countered in any manner. But the truth is, look, for example, at a situation where we had just 4 billion reserves in 1996 to 1999 or thereabouts. Our 4 billion reserves managed to sustain an exchange rate of about 80 naira to a dollar. But conversely, we have today $40 billion, 10 times what we had in 1996-98, and we have an extended imports cover, imports demand cover. In other words, we could cover our imports for another 10, 15 months or so, in place of the just 2-3 months that we could cover, on which we could cover our imports in 1996-98. Surprisingly and unexpectedly, paradoxically, we are talking of an exchange rate of 160, 170 That is absolute madness. It is recklessness. It has nothing to do with economic reality.
Now let me ask you, because people are wondering why did it take the leaking of a letter by the governor of the central bank for NNPC and the Ministry of Finance to come together and reconcile the federal accounts? All right, viewers, we have a little technical problem with our guest. We are going to try to reconnect to him. And when he comes back, we will ask him several questions. We've not even gone into the budget. You know, he mentioned while he was talking a few minutes ago that the recurring budget expenditure is about 74% of the economy. We want to know what that means for the man on the street. We're also going to talk about the oil reserve and how much we've made during the last 50 years from crude oil, and what reserve we have in place. All right, I think we got him back. Welcome back, Henry Boyo.
Thank you.
All right. So when you left off, let me just ask you, because let me ask you. So why is it that it took a letter, the leaking of a letter from the central bank governor, for the NNPC and the central bank and the finance ministry to meet and reconcile their accounts? And why is it that at the end, when they announced that $10.8 billion was still missing, people were not outraged?
Well, I think we should first of all be wary of the fact that the letter was written in the first place. Obviously, I'm not holding brief for the NNPC, but obviously no $49 billion were missing. And evidently also no 10.8 billion is still outstanding. But you're right, we are aware that the various ministries and departments and agencies have, that is including the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, the Revenue Mobilization Committee, the Fiscal Accounts Committee, all of them meet regularly. And one should wonder why it should take 12 months or more, because according to the letter that Sanusi wrote, this thing had been happening, according to him, for so many months. Why did it take so long to bring it out into the open, or even to contact Mr. President, even though he said he verbally talked to Mr. President? Was he not satisfied with the explanations or the reconciliations which we all expect that would happen between the ministries during the interministerial meetings? So we think, to my mind, it's either mischief. It certainly isn't ignorance, because I'm sure they had plenty of time. We couldn't certainly be talking of reconciliation of a sum of over $30 billion within 24 hours of the information coming out. So, I mean, you know, that should show that there's an element of mischief, definitely, because these interministerial agencies hold regular meetings, and they should have known. To my mind, it was more an attempt on the part of Mr. Governor of Central Bank to distract information, to distract attention from the failures of the central bank. The central bank's main priority, according to the central bank, is the mandate is price stability. As we know, we have never had price stability in the last 15 years of any central bank governor. Instead, we have had a series of strategies that have oppressed and pauperized our people, especially totally unexpectedly, against the trend of having increasing reserves. So the issue of missing money and the information coming up at the time it did must be political, must be mischief, couldn't be ignorance. Certainly, it must also be an attempt to distract attention from the failures.
All right, Mr. Boyo, let me ask you, because today's paper, we read that NNPC finally gave an explanation for that money, so-called missing money, the $10.8 billion. And am I just dumb, or is it that something is wrong where the NNPC can spend that amount of money without going through appropriation process?
You're absolutely right. You are not dumb at all, but you have not been asking the right questions. You may be dumber for not asking the central bank where it got all the money to spend on the so-called interventions that they have made And you may also be dumber because you are not asking why central bank continues endlessly to mop up excess liquidity, and you don't wonder where the excess liquidity comes from. And you may also be dumber that you're not asking questions that the exchange rate of the naira continues to fall in spite of increased demand, import demand cover, and also increasing dollar reserves. And you will certainly be very dumb if you don't understand that central bank at the moment is busy flooding the system with cash current naira and going back and borrowing it back at 10, 12, 13, 14%. And if you didn't ask any questions about that at that time, before central bank itself came out and admitted that they were doing such a foolish thing, then you must have been very, very dumb also.
Now, you mentioned what we have for the figure for 2014 for the budget is that 76.35% will go to recurrent expenditure, while 37.7% is for capital expenditure. Now, what does that mean for the man on the street?
It means nothing. It means there's no progress. It means there's no growth. And it means also that Madam Economic Finance Minister has been deceiving us. You can't have, you see, there is no country in the world, leave aside the fiscal policies of government and things like that, which is important, no doubt, especially in a situation where you are only spending 28% on capital expenditure after promising that you will deliver on that particular subsector within 3 years. But probably the most important thing and the most damaging thing to the economy, because even if you had 50% capital expenditure and 50% recurrent expenditure, even a higher percentage as capital expenditure, the economy will still crumble because the fiscal component of the budget is supposed to be predicated on a monetary policy framework that is sustainable and that is not poisonous to the economy. The monetary framework that we adopt at the moment is poisonous to the economy. It has been so for over 20 years. The monetary framework that ensures that we get poorer when we get richer is not something we're talking about. A monetary framework that adopts or accommodates 2 trillion naira in subsidies annually in a budget of 5 trillion or so cannot be a sensible budget at all.
We are going to talk about subsidy. Let me ask you this. In 2012, a presidential committee looked at the public service reform, and they discovered that top government officials in Nigeria, they were taking home 1.26 trillion a year out of the national budget of 4.9 trillion. Why is it that there is no sense of outrage that this is happening from Nigerians, from economists like you? What is going on? How could that be that less than 2% of the population is taking home this amount of money?
You're absolutely right, Rudolph. I'm also worried that economists, professionals, accountants, and people like that have not raised any eyebrow on the humongous amount being devoted not only to the National Assembly expenditure, but also altogether in area of recurrent expenditure. All the savings we have made from selling off the public enterprises that were loss makers, the ghost workers who have been sent out of the system, all the monetization of various, how would I say it, things that had to be done to civil servants in the past should have reduced the recurrent expenditure tremendously. But surprisingly, instead of reducing it, it's been increasing it. But having said so, it is more worrisome that we are not concerned that, look, a central bank tells you, confesses, in other words, that, look, we have been foolish all this time. We have been foolishly giving money to the banks for so many years, for over a decade, certainly, and we go back and borrow the money back at 10, 11, 12%. And you are not alarmed. I'm not aware that SAHARA reporters or SAHARA TV raised any issues about this. So it bothers me. It seems that there is a collusion of some sort to keep quiet and raise questions on issues that are peripheral but are not fundamental to reconstructing the Nigerian economy. If a central bank governor should say, look, we have been foolish all along by giving money to the banks and borrowing the money back, but we're only going to be foolish 50% more, less, because we have now realized that all the monies we are giving to the bank and we're borrowing back, we won't do it anymore. We only do it for 50% of government deposits. That sounds very strange, don't you think? That you say, you admit, that you say, we've been foolish, but we're only going to be foolish 50% of the way henceforth. I mean, that doesn't make sense, especially when the foolishness entails that you are borrowing money you didn't need, and you are depriving the real sector, crowding out the real sector from accessing credit at very cheap or reasonable rates by borrowing money you don't need and keeping it and storing it as idle funds. I think SAHARA reporters should make a big thing about this, because you can't have a situation where a government says, we are borrowing money we don't need, and we are quite happy to do so. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Now let me ask you, because the amount of money we spend on oil subsidy is still over what we spend on education, for instance. And in 2012 essay you wrote, you suggested that there is a way to make subsidy history without hurting the poor. Now, can you explain it in a way that ordinary people can understand? Because part of the problem is that economists like you cannot communicate the way that regular people will understand, so that they can really know what's going on. Like what you talked about, the central bank, the intricacies. Most people don't understand what that means. You know, when you say that this is the policy they are pursuing, it's about communication sometimes. How do you communicate with regular people to say that we are spending more on subsidy more than education, and you know the way that we can make subsidy history without hurting the poor? Can you explain that to viewers?
Yes, I think I can. And I have, even though I would say I have tried for 12 years to say the same thing in different ways, and I have tried as much as possible to use very, very simple language. If you read my articles, you will realize that I do make an effort in that direction. So I hope I'm not talking to the wall. But having said so, let us look at a very simple scenario where, for example, let's assume that 1 liter of petrol sells for, as a commodity, petrol sells for maybe $1 per liter. In other words, give or take 5–10% for transportation and this. But let's just assume, talk on the basic commodity price of, say, 1 liter equals $1. That would translate to 1 liter equals 160 naira per liter in Nigeria, okay? Now, if you have a situation where, as a result of better management of the economy and the adoption of dollar certificates for the payment of dollar-derived revenue, you would suddenly find that the naira becomes stronger. And if instead of 160 naira to $1, the naira becomes 80 naira to $1, then it means that 1 liter of petrol will still sell for $1, that is the international commodity price of petrol, and sell in Nigeria for 80 naira per liter. Well, if you are able to sell petrol in Nigeria at 80 naira per liter, and you are selling at 97 naira per liter, surely you don't need to pay a kobo of subsidy. Plus also you have 17 naira per liter, which you can quietly charge as a sales tax in place of paying out 2 trillion naira, almost 40% of your annual budget as subsidy. And nobody finds this strange. And one suggests an alternative way of benignly treating this matter without hurting the poor and ensuring we don't pay subsidies, so that we can also have increased purchasing power of the meager incomes we have, and so also that government does not have to borrow money it does not need, and government does not also have to put money in the hands of the banks and go back and borrow it back the next day. We have said this for 12 years, and it requires just a simple adoption of a change in policy, such that instead of CBN capturing the dollar revenue, CBN now pays dollar certificates to the beneficiaries of the Federation Pool, who would need to take those dollar certificates and go to the banks and change to naira. The moment you do that, I bet you, trust me on that, inflation will fall to 2–3%, interest rate will fall to 6–7%, because why? The central bank and the government would not need to borrow money they don't need. The market would become open. The bankers would come looking for investors to borrow, because now the old fool who used to come and give them money and borrow it back the next day is no more so foolish. So once you have that, you would have a situation where you don't have to pay subsidy, because petrol is going at 80 naira per liter, below the 97 naira, and you'll be saving 2 trillion naira also in terms of subsidy payments. Now, I hope that's clear enough. Did I make it a bit clear?
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear. But now let me ask you, why is it? What do you think that the government is not interested in adopting something like this? Why?
For a very simple reason. I mean, that's where they make the money. When you have, I always make the how would I say, the comparison between the church rat and the rat in the bakery. the rat in the bakery would always get fattened by all the droppings from the bakery table, whereas the church rat has nothing to eat because there's no food in the church. You know, what is happening is that the excess money, you have never wondered why. I'm sure you report about the excess liquidity and you clap for government every time and report with fanfare that government is busy mopping up excess liquidity, but you have never asked, not at least not to my knowledge, why the excess liquidity continues or why the government condones a situation where they create excess liquidity every time and then go back and mop it back. Once that is taken out or factored out of the system, you would find that immediately the Nigerian economy would be on an upward swing and would certainly impact much more benignly, much more supportively on our people rather than a situation where we have government borrowing back its own money. So in other words, once you have excess liquidity, it is like the bakery. There's plenty of money around and so much droppings and things like that, leakages that could come from. So the government would rather continue to have these leakages and persist in these leakages than to have a situation where once you introduce dollar certificates, excess liquidity and surplus money in the system would disappear. The avenues of corruption may not be eliminated, but certainly would diminish. Those are the reasons. That is the reason why also central bank is not interested, because why? Have you ever asked how central bank gets its $40 billion worth of reserves? Indeed, the reality, of course, is that once central bank has flooded the system with the naira that it created in order to pay, in inverted commas, for the dollars it has captured from our dollar treasury, then, of course, the dollars belong to central bank. So they argue. So while you are having excess liquidity problem, the central bank is having a dollar surplus problem, because you recall when the central bank went to China with Mr. President some time ago, Mr. President went in search of loans for our railways and other such infrastructural enhancement. The central bank governor was also in China looking for places to invest the dollars that it had gathered from the Nigerian economy. So you can understand why neither the government nor the central bank nor the parliamentarians are interested in a situation where discipline will be as that experienced by the rat in the church rather than the rat in the bakery.
All right, Mr. Henry Boyo, let me thank you so much for coming on our show. We are totally out of time, and I hope we will invite you back and you will be able to come and help us understand all the economic policies that we see in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
All right, when we come back, we're going to continue our programming. We are going to talk to the House of Rep chairman of the Committee on Finance. We're going to ask him several questions about the budget and the encounter that he had with the Minister of Finance. So stay tuned.